Hey, Geekscapists, welcome to a brand new Geekscape podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan London. And if this is your first Geekscape, well, you're going to be hearing a lot of pop culture talk over the next hour. When I started Geekscape back in 2005-06, I said I want to interview people about pop culture. And that's kind of what we've been doing for the last 16 years. My guest this week is Tony Fleecs. I hope you're familiar with Tony because I've been telling you to read his book, Stray Dogs from Image, for at least the last 2 years. And he's got a brand new book called Local Man, which I'm really in love with. It's got a ton of pathos. It's, well, we are all there during the whole Image situation in the 90s when Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri books and all those amazing books that were part of our comic book adolescence, I want to say, or at least teenage years. They influenced us. And then I feel like comics just kind of moved on. We went into the bad girl era, and then we went into like the writer focused era that kind of came around the turn of the century. And I look back at those Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld Image books from the very beginning of Image very fondly. But what if you're one of the characters in those books and you go back home after a disgracing event and your town doesn't want anything to do with you? They tell you to kick rocks and you're not welcome around here. But hey, you're one of these superheroes that had a great team and had saved the world several times over. That's kind of the soft pitch for Local Man. I love this book. We're going to talk to Tony about it. And of course, we're going to talk Stray Dogs because that's a book, again, I've been recommending for years. A little bit of bookkeeping here on Geekscape. Sorry, I haven't been here the last 2 weeks. Thanks to Christian Blatt and John for filling in last week. And if you haven't heard that episode, and I'm worried you haven't because the numbers have dipped, maybe because I wasn't hosting it, but that is no excuse. That episode is excellent. Christian and John sat down with Kenny Johnson, who's been on the show before, who he created V, the TV show. He was showrunner of The Incredible Hulk, The $1 Million Man. I think he co-created Alien Nation. Like, this guy's TV resume for genre TV in the 80s is untouchable. And he gave Christian and John an hour and a half talking about V because it turns 40 years this May. And the stories that came out of that interview had my jaw dropped the entire weekend listening to this thing. So please, after you're done listening to me talk to Tony, flip one episode back on the feed because you're subscribing. Of course, you better be subscribing to Geekscape and listen to that Kenny Johnson episode. I wish I could have hosted it. I'm glad at this point I didn't because Christian and John did a great job and got some amazing stories out of Kenny. And I loved it. The other piece of bookkeeping is Geekscape Games, our video game show, has changed its name to Dynamic Resolution. I think that's a Geekscape, I think that's a video game inside joke. I don't know, but Shane is excited about the name change. If you're looking for video game talk on the Geekscape network, Dynamic Resolution is the name of the Geekscape show. Geekscape Games has changed its names, which is great. All the shows here on the Geekscape network are independent. I don't own them. They can come and go as they wish. And if they want to be a part of Geekscape and the community that we have between podcasters here, we love that. So search for Geekscape on any podcatchers, and maybe you'll find one of our shows, and it'll be the show for you. But we're talking all comic books on this episode, coming back with Tony Fleecs. Let's get it started. All right, Geekscapists, let's get right to it. I'm super excited about this guest, Tony Fleecs, because again, Stray Dogs is a book that you should have been reading for the last 2 years because I was instantly a fan upon reading the first issue. I learned about it because our good friend Tony Rodriguez, who's been a part of this show and who I've harassed on camera at Comic Cons from the very beginning, It was a part of it, is a part of it. And I recently talked to him at LA Comic Con, and he said, "Hey, you got to get Tony on the show." Tony was signing this new book, Local Man, at my local comic book shop. I made a point to come by his signing and harass the man, and then follow up online and harass him online to come on the show. And he's here with us today after much harassment from yours truly. Tony, thanks for coming on the show despite my harassment.
Yeah, man, I love harassment. That's how you can really get a hold of me. It's just, come at me, dog.
Don't do that. Don't encourage them. Don't encourage them. You don't. I mean, we have Geekscapists like Frank Sanders, who was such an enthused Geekscape listener that he took a photo shoot wearing a Geekscape T-shirt amidst his entire arsenal of guns, and sent those pictures to me. And yeah, that was a bit alarming. So you don't want what Geekscape's got.
Well, that seems threatening. Yeah, just verbal harassment mostly. That's fine.
So Tony, like, I know Tone really well, and Tone speaks highly of you. And when I saw his name on Stray Dogs, I had to pick up this book, especially because the pitch for it was Homeward Bound meets Silence of the Lambs. How would you describe Stray Dogs? Because we're going to talk about it a little bit, and then I want to rewind a little bit, learn a little bit about you and how you came up in comics. But the Geekscapists at this point should be reading Stray Dogs. There's some Stray Dogs fans watching. What's your pitch for Stray Dogs, and where did it come from?
All right, so here's the pitch I do for Stray Dogs when I'm at Comic-Con or at a signing or whatever. There's a group of dogs. They all live in a house together. All different shapes and sizes and breeds of dogs. Boy dogs, girl dogs, old dogs, young dogs. And they all have dog brains, not like people brains. So they're not... they're not like cartoon characters where they know, like, pop culture references and stuff like this, and they don't have great memories. So none of them remember that their master is actually a serial killer who collects dogs from his victims, and each one of them is a trophy that he's taken from one of his murder scenes. That's the pitch for it. That's sort of what you get in the first issue. So spoilers. But then it's a story about, like, how do these dogs who don't have thumbs, can't open doors, can't speak, how do they get out of this situation? How do they stop this? How do they stop him from killing again, basically?
And how do they learn the situation? Like, how and accept the situation again? Because dogs, I guess, have short memories. At least they do here. And what I love about it in Geekscape is I immediately read the first issue, and this is what I would do when I'd get it. I would pass it over to Heidi. I'd read it in bed. I'd pass it over to Heidi and be like, "You got to read this," because the artwork brings you in, because it reminds you of those classic Disney animations. I mean, it is cartoonish in that sense, and there's also that Muppet Babies aspect where you don't see any of the humans like above the knees, right? This is all from the dog's perspectives. But I got to tell you, Tony, like, things are kind of eerie in that first issue, and then things get very serious. And there was a point where I said, "Sweetie, I'm not passing you this comic. I think it's time out for Stray Dogs for you, because this will upset you." There's some upsetting stuff in Stray Dogs because the circumstances are so high. Again, they're in a serial killer house, and they need to figure out how to get out. It's awesome, man.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the premise sort of was born out of, I had the idea of a serial killer that took people's dogs as trophies, and then I wasn't quite sure how I would tell that story, or if that was even something I would do, until the idea of telling it from the dog's point of view and doing it sort of like an Oliver and Company or like a Rover Dangerfield type setting, but just with a serial killer also. Once I realized that it was all from the dog's point of view, and we were like strictly in the dog's point of view, then that sort of clarified everything. But the idea was always, looks like an animated movie, reads like a horror movie, and so built into that is, yeah, it's gonna get rough, and people, we make these dogs as adorable and as lovable as possible, and then like they do in good, scary movies or horror stories, is like the one you love the most is going to get it, and then you're going to be, more invested, or you're going to throw the thing across the room. But either way, I feel like that it's sort of had an effect on you. That was really what our fear was going in. Now I'm just filibustering.
No. This is the place to filibuster. Well, this is the place to promote for sure. And I agree with everything you're saying. I found it to be incredibly engaging. And again, if you do not have those stakes, if you're not losing a couple members of the party, your villain doesn't really have a whole lot of oomph. Right?
Well, yeah, and because we're telling it from the dog's point of view, like even and it's that thing where people if you kill a person, that's one thing, but if you hurt a dog, that's a completely different thing. So like we show this guy like killing women, like from issue 1. And so it's like, all right, well, he's obviously a monster, but how are people afraid of him? Are people scared at what he might do? And it's not until you get to a certain point in the book, they're like, oh, people are like, we don't know what this guy might do,
Mm-hmm.
And that was sort of the journey we wanted to take people on. And I knew what the ending was from the beginning, and I felt like if we can get to that, it'll be satisfying enough that like we can earn, we can't just have him going apeshit in the middle and just slaughtering dogs left and right. But I feel like you basically have to tell a story that earns the sacrifices that you make in the story, right? Like you have to, if you feel like you can get to a place where it pays for it, then you're okay, or not. But I think we paid for it.
And what's the relationship with Trish Forstner? Y'all co-created it together, or you talk to me about that?
Yeah, so I had the idea for the book, and I knew that I wanted to just write it and not draw it, because I'd been drawing comics professionally for probably like 10 years at that point. And I drew stuff real cartoony, like this is something that is sort of in my wheelhouse, but I knew that I wanted it to look a very specific way, and it wasn't exactly how I draw, which like I'm sure to the untrained eye, it's sort of like, 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. But Trish is another artist that also drew My Little Pony comics, which is where I came from. And I had seen her do these sort of like very 90s animation inspired pieces, like fan art pieces. And she did a couple drawings that were real Don Bluthy. And so I just said, like, I reached out to her and I said, like, hey, we're going to be at this convention together. Would you be interested in working on something? And so we just sort of like, we sat down at a My Little Pony convention, and I basically just pitched her the first issue. Like we sort of in the middle of all this like rainbows and unicorns and stuff, I was just like, all right, so there's a serial murderer, there's a killer of women, and here's what he does, and we got into it. And by the time I got done to the twist at the end of the first issue, she was like, I want to, whatever this is, I want to do it. And so we started sending sketches back and forth, and she would, she works a full-time job, so she would just doodle in her notepad at work and sort of send me little dog drawings, and we sort of built the thing from there. We, over the course of a few years, we developed the whole thing and drew it, and at a certain point pitched it to Image, and the rest is comic books.
I love it, and I love the Don Bluth stuff. I feel like Don Bluth. I feel like the drawing style that Trish brings to it, the fact that it lends itself more to Don Bluth than Walt Disney. With Don Bluth, there was always that hint of there's something a little darker with the Don Bluth stuff. They were scary. Rats of Nim or something else. There was always something a little darker. Even when he was working at Disney with the Black Cauldron, there was a darker element to his work. And again, Geekscape, I can't sell this book enough. I've been trying for 2 years. If you're not picking it up at this point, you're not. This is your first. Then welcome to Geekscape. This is your first episode because it's been my job for the last 2 years to get you to support it. How much did the work for IDW doing books like My Little Pony or Star Wars Adventure, some of these more kids books, how much did that just say, hey, I want to kill a couple of these bastards? And here you've got stray dogs.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was just like, there's no stakes in these My Little Pony books.
What if I could just kill some of them? Like, I'm sick of looking at these things. Like, I mean, those jobs at IDW, I mean, I'm sure they're great. They're godsend. They're not your story, I would like to assume.
Yeah, I was just drawing those for the most part. I think I wrote, like, out of the 50 or so issues of My Little Pony that I drew, I think I wrote 2 of them or 3. So
sure.
So for the most part, it was just, work for hire, drawing stories, but it was like, paid comic book school, like I just sort of went in there and I told stories for, I drew 50 comics in ponies. I drew a bunch of Star Wars comics, so I was sort of just like learning on the job. And I feel like we took a lot of that stuff and put it right into Stray Dogs, like the storytelling in Stray Dogs, the breakdowns, the thumbnails and stuff. That was all like the way we did it was I would write the script and then I would do thumbnails and send those to Tone, and then Tone would flesh that out into a more detailed backgrounds, and he would just leave the dogs out, and then Trish would go in and like populate the thing with dogs and do all the acting and stuff like that. So it's a real unique workflow for how we made this thing. But it's sort of like all of us taking the stuff that we were really good at and putting it into one thing.
That's an incredible process. Usually it is the penciler does the pencils. And if you need to shift styles, you figure out how to do it, but it's all in. Yeah. I thought that Tone was responsible for the layouts, but in this, it seems like he's responsible for the location and the settings, and the character blocking was done by Trish, and it's almost like a film workflow as much as it was a comic book workflow. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, it was a real weird way to do it, and it sort of developed organically. Tone and I we worked together in a studio for years before Stray Dogs, and we would do projects together. Sometimes it would be like he would do layouts or I would do layouts. We would sort of like just whoever could pitch in on whatever part of a thing, and we would take on like these group projects. And then I did this book called Time Shopper right before Stray Dogs. And that was with a buddy of mine named Christian Misi, who's a caricature artist and who has done a lot of comic stuff. But on this one, he felt like he wanted a boost on the storytelling and the backgrounds and stuff like that. And so for that one, we hired Tone to do layouts, and he did full like traditional layouts like you would normally think of them. But his are so detailed. Like he's a maniac. He just goes crazy on them. So we called it the same thing on Stray Dogs, but eventually him even drawing he would just do his thing and go crazy on it. But I had very specific ideas about the pacing and the shots and stuff. So I would do thumbnails, and then he would go crazy on his layouts. And so we could have just called it backgrounds. And originally he was drawing the dogs too, but that would get in Trish's head. And she was just like, well, I already see what the dog looks like. It's hard for me to like draw my own take on this when it's right there. So we just ended up just leaving them out of there. Or I would just draw little stick figure dogs where it wouldn't confuse anybody any. So yeah, it was very strange process. When I explain it to other comic artist friends, they're just like, why the fuck did you do that? Like,
as a filmmaker, it makes sense. As a filmmaker, especially this story, which is about, it feels like a fish out of water story in a sense that these are animated looking cartoon-ish characters. They're cute. They're lovable. They're put in a very dark place. And so to have somebody handle the dark tone of the environment and have someone else handle the lighter, cute tone of the characters, I think that separation is incredible, and part of the alchemy that's lent itself to a really awesome tone in your book. And not a pun for my friend Tone Rodriguez. I love you, Tone. But I think it's been incredible. And in Geekscape, you can find Stray Dogs on any comic book shelf. You can definitely order it online. And then there's Stray Dogs Dog Days, which is a bunch of single issues collected into a trade. You're going to want both of them. You're going to want to read the first Stray Dogs first. And I'm guessing because I love it, I'm sure people love it. Tony, is there going to be a follow-up for the three all coming up soon?
Yeah, we're working on something right now. So hopefully this time next year, I would guess. We want to, it'll probably be longer than Stray Dogs. I mean, it'll definitely be longer than Stray Dogs.
It is a Stray Dog story, though.
It's not called Stray Dogs. It's in the same, like it's animals and it's a horror story, and people who like Stray Dogs will be happy with this for sure.
I'm excited to hear. Yeah, no, I'm stoked to hear from it or hear more about it. I honestly was open to this book as well, and I don't want to create competition for you, but Dark Horse has that Evan Dorkin book, Beast of Burden, which is, I mean, Jill Thompson's doing this beautiful art style on it. Geekscape it is a different book, and I'm not saying buy one or the other. You're going to want to buy both. Stray Dogs, because Tony came on the show. I haven't invited Evan on the show, but obviously Milk and Cheese made me a nihilist in high school. Right. But Beast of Burden is a similar book, but that's a different pitch. Beast of Burden has a magical element to it. The dogs communicate like humans, and some of them have magic abilities. That is more like if Homeward Bound took place around a Hellmouth from Buffy, and there's a lot of supernatural things going on in Beast of Burden. They're totally very different books. Doesn't have an animated style. This one, Stray Dogs, is the one that you're going to want to pick up. You're going to want to pick up both, but this is the one that you're going to want to pick up thanks to Tony being on our show. And you're not going to be able to miss it. It's got that animated style, and it just gets darker. I love it. And Jim Pelgrinelli over in New York says, is anybody developing this for an animated show? Because I can't think of a streamer that couldn't make a good home for this. Pardon the pun, and making a home for it. Jim has also, I think, kidnapped some people before, but so he knows what he's talking about.
Nobody right now. We originally sold we optioned it to Paramount when the book was right before the book started coming out, and they had it for a while. But Hollywood is bizarre right now, so we'll we'll see what happens. It's always somebody's always looking at it, or my manager's always sending it somewhere. So we'll see what happens. I imagine it'll be something at some point. We sort of made the book exactly what we wanted the story to be, so that whatever else happens after that is like, well, I hope they make something with it, but the story exists like exactly how I want it to exist right now. So anything else after that it seems like it's would be a gravy. Like I'm real happy with how the book came out, and Trish did such a great job, and Tone and Brad Simpson, the colorist. So it's just like I can't imagine. It's too much to hope that there would be some other thing after that. Maybe, I don't know.
And Geekscape is when something like Mouse Guard is over at Fox, or speaking of Viacom, the home of Paramount, when Jeff Smith's Bone is at Nickelodeon for so long, and I know I'm specifically talking about animated, like animation friendly or kind of more cartoon friendly, cute books, but these are ones that have been optioned by major studios, and they sometimes die on the vine. I mean, the Mouse Guard story haunts me, because seeing some of that beautiful artwork that was created for Mouse Guard over at Fox, and was just kind of, absorbed, I think, in the Disney. There's only one room for one mouse over at Disney once they bought Fox, and sadly it's not the Mouse Guard folks.
Snakes.
Damn. And then you've got, the cancellation of Jeff Smith's Bone over at Nickelodeon in Geekscape, don't quote me on this stuff. I probably shouldn't be shouting it like it's fact, but how is that one not the one that has been made over the last 20 years? I mean, Bone is the kind of the gold standard for a lot of this stuff.
It's real crazy. Like it is such a different world that it seems like something can be an enormous hit in comics, like the way Bone is. I mean, Bone's a hit in books just in general, outside of comics.
Scholastic probably makes tons off of it.
Yeah.
Right.
And Mouse Guard, the same thing. Stray Dogs sold incredibly well, but to Hollywood, their metrics are so different. It doesn't even, there's not even a algorithm set up for them to figure out like what a successful comic means to a movie going audience. I think it's just, they know if it's a Marvel or a DC thing, they know what that audience is, and then everything else they're just like.
And they didn't always know Geekscape. It's like we all sat through the 90s. They did not always know that those Marvel ones were going to become hits. So talk to me about like your history of it. We talked about the IDW books being a bit of a grad school for comics for you, and some, obviously some financial sustenance to get you in the game, keep you in the game. I love Tone, and you probably worked with Chris Moreno and those guys over at the studio. But before that, you had that book In My Lifetime, 2006.
Yeah.
This seems like a Fortune and Glory type thing. But remember, that was the book that Bendis did before he landed over at Marvel. Autobiographical. I also love the stuff that Jeff Lemire did up in Canada when he was doing stuff like Essex County. Is it In My Lifetime? I'm not familiar with the book. Is it kind of like your Essex County? Is kind of your autobiographical? Let's put it on paper, comic telling of your life.
Yeah, that's my first book, and it was at the time I was reading American Splendor a lot because that.
Oh my god, classic.
I'm not like super hip, so I didn't read American Splendor before the movie came out, but there was sort of like a autobio explosion that was going on around them too, because there was that. There was Jeffrey Brown stuff was really popping in the early 2000s. Who else? Craig Thompson Blankets was a big deal back then. It was sort of like a lot of early 2000 indie stuff was autobio. James Kolchaka was doing like his diary comics.
Former Geekscape guest. We just had him on late last year, I think.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, James is great.
There was an artist named Liz Prince who did this book that I really liked called Will You Still Love Me If I Wet the Bed? There's just like a lot of sort of like early 2000s, like cute, sort of like emo comics, like just like
thanks, Ghost World.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And at the time I was doing a lot of like I had gone to art school and I got my first job in art. I was a graphic designer at a TV station, and I worked there for I guess at this point when I started making this comic, I'd worked there for probably about 4 or 5 years, 6 years. And I was just like, well, I guess I'm either gonna do this forever or I'll, actually try and make comics. And I've been reading comics my whole life. And like when I was growing up, I either wanted to make comics or be like an animator, like make Disney cartoons. And I went to college to be an animator. And while I was there, I was like, I don't think this is for me. So I was sort of figuring out what I was going to be as a grown up in my early 20s. And I was doing a lot of like online, like message board culture. I was on the Bendis board a lot, and there was a real creative spirit there. Like he made indie comics, he made Fortune and Glory, and so there were people that came there just because they loved Spider-Man or Daredevil, but there were also people there because they love Fortune and Glory or they like Goldfish or his Jinx World stuff. And so there was a lot of people making their own stuff, and it was just a real fertile time. And I could draw, and I had never really written anything outside of like school. But all this stuff that I was seeing, I was just like, I don't know if like there's a lot of collaboration going on and people, making books with other people online. And I just didn't really link up with anybody that I was just like, this person has exactly my taste or has exactly like, I didn't find anybody that was like my exact match. And so I was just like, well, I tell stories all the time, like I go out and things happen to me, and then I can't wait to tell somebody, the story or figure out like the best angle to tell the story from. And so I just wrote down a few of those stories, like as if I was at the bar, just telling, my friends what happened to me at the doctor or what happened to me on a date or whatever. And then I drew those, and it ended up being like a 30-page, one shot with a bunch of short stories in it. And I took my friends from the comic store were like, you should print up an ash can of that and take it to Wizard World Chicago with us. Because I was at the time I was in the Midwest in South Dakota.
Did you grow up around there? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Colorado, and I went to art school there. And then I moved to South Dakota, and I lived there for the 6 years while I was working at the TV station.
Damn. South Dakota, a whole lot to do there, or
just draw comics, drink, work, get into mischief.
Yeah, you're either drawing comics to get out or you're gonna die there.
Yeah. They had a great comic store there, Rainbow Comics. I would go down there a couple times a week.
South Dakota?
Yeah.
They're gonna get a trash can through their window with that name. You be careful in South Dakota with your Rainbow Comic, boy.
Listen, it's in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Yeah, okay. A little bigger. They probably have a college there, some educated folks.
The Portland of South Dakota.
Don't push it though, Rainbow Comics.
But yeah, so we went out to Wizard World Chicago, and I gave that thing to like all my favorite creators, and I gave it to all like the small press publishers and publishers that we talked to, and just sort of like, hey, I'm thinking about making comics, basically. Like, you've gone to Comic Cons, you see people passing out their stuff.
We have a booth there every summer, including this coming summer, where we would love to host Tony to come and sign issues. If you don't got space for you one day over at Image, just come down the hallway, down the aisle. We are a few rows from Image, and we've got a nice 10 by 10 right there for signing.
Oh yeah, we'll hang out.
It'd be fun. So how many ash cans? How many ash cans you make up at the local Kinko's? You're doing this at Kinko's? Where are you doing 100 of these things? Okay,
it was Kinko's. I made 100.
I guessed it was actually Kinko's.
Yeah, of course. Where else?
Did you come out of like punk rock zine culture and all that? Is that kind of where you're getting this DIY kind of nature?
No, but I had made, like in high school, anytime I had a project or something, I would make comics then. Like, I had made a bunch of mini comics before this, just.
But zine style.
Yeah, exactly like zine style. I mean, I graduated in 97, so zines were everywhere. And so you definitely,
we're the same age, you and I. We're cut from the same like cultural cloth of the 90s. Yeah.
So yeah, you couldn't miss how to put together, a zine like that. The long stapler army.
Oh yeah. And it carried me into directing. Booking those local shows in Austin, like the basement shows and that stuff. Like, when I got to college, it was like time to go to radio and do it on radio and have bands come play radio. And then when moving out to LA, when you wanted to point at cameras and stuff, like you go right into music videos, knowing all those bands. And a lot of the times you're just putting a production to me is no different than putting on an indie show or indie. It's like you still got to find like who's got a PA, who's got a basement we can borrow, who's got a rec center we can borrow, and the same kind of stuff goes into production. Like it's amazing how much like tape and glue and fishing line. We literally used fishing line 3 weeks ago on a music video, fairly well-sized music video, and they turn to me and they go, Jonathan, so how are we gonna get this door to open magically? That alarm means that there it is. Matt Kelly just added another podcast to the Geekscape network. I think we're at like 50,000 now. No, we used fishing line on this music video to open a door magically in a void, and that's how you do it. So the zine culture helps. Comics are the same. Comics are the same.
It's like 3 people instead of 8. But
who are those creators? Like, if you're going to Wizard World Chicago, I want to find your influences. Like, who are those creators that you were like, I have to get this ash can to this person because they were such an influence on me? Or does it make sense? Like who got you into comics? What voices did you hear that you needed to that inspired you?
At that one, I definitely remember Brian Michael Bendis was a big deal to me at that time. This was like 2005, so he was just like on fire. And like I hadn't read anybody that wrote characters like that before, like in superhero comics, and I hadn't gone deep enough in like black and white comics. Like I had my few that I really loved, but I hadn't found anybody that wrote people that talk like humans like that. So he was a big deal. I remember I gave one to Frank Miller. I'm sure he did not give a shit at all.
Frank. I think we saw him a few years later at the 2008 Scream Awards or Neptune Awards or Saturn Awards or something. Like I just remember, like he wanted nothing to do with the Geekscape interview.
Nice.
It's fine. We got Stan, and we created a great, beautiful friendship with Stan for the rest of his life. But Frank wasn't going to have it.
I don't remember if Stan Lee was there. I met him at other shows. I don't think I gave him one of my books. I remember like we gave one to Joe Quesada.
He's friendly and receptive, I believe. No, that's how I found him. Yeah, I found him to be great. Yeah.
But then there were like podcasters, like the guys who would be around comics were just starting up around then. I don't know if you remember that show.
The iFanboys. Do you remember, Ron over at Image, who does some of the convention stuff? Like he started with that iFanboy stuff. We came up together on the iFanboys. I still talk to Connor a little bit online, but those are great kids.
I don't remember if
that are now adults with families.
Right, yeah, great grandparents. I don't remember if those guys were there, but I know the Round Comics guys were Chicago guys, so they were definitely that show. I'm pretty sure I gave it to like Jim Mahfood was inspirational to me at that time for sure. Just all kinds of people. But like as far as like before that coming up, the people that really inspired me to make my own stuff were the Image guys. And it was David Lapham, Stray Bullets, and it was Terry Moore, Strangers in Paradise, and it was this sort of like group of there was like a lot of guys who were just barely grown-ups, like kids who were just making their own comics and putting stuff out. And a lot of those guys, I just remember just being enraptured by the idea that Joe Madureira started working at Marvel when he's 15 years old or something,
It's incredible.
Chap was drawing Youngblood when he was, 9.5 years old.
And Dave Lapham, for me, I think that first Stray Bullets comic, the collected book is great. I think the whole series is awesome. Geekscape is Dave Lapham is one of my favorite writers. I've not only suggested Stray Bullets to all of you all over the years, but even his Daredevil Punisher series that he drew and wrote is fantastic. I think I lost your visual, Tony, but I can still hear you, I believe.
I'm here.
Yeah. Dave Lapham's one of the only other people that I've gotten an autograph from. It's you who autographed my copy of Local Man and Dave Lapham. And what I'm putting together from you, because you told me Terry Moore as well, is that being able to, and I'm guessing Ed Brubaker's on the list as well, being able to hear a character distinctively as a human and as a person and had to have that pathos is big with you, because those are things that writers like Terry Moore, who I asked once, I said, hey, Terry, you got to help me with these female characters. How do you write them? And he just looked at me and says, have you ever been, you ever met a woman? Let me see how he said it. He says, you ever had a disagreement with a woman? And he said, yeah. And he goes, were they ever wrong? And I said, no, not really. And he goes, that's how you write them. Remember that. I remember Terry saying that to me. But Dave Lapham, for me, is someone who has not gotten his due for the fantastic work he has done. And I think Stray Bullets is an overlooked gem as a body of work. And it is a large body of work. Dave Lapham is someone who I was nervous to meet and get an autograph from.
Oh, yeah. I never have. I've been at conventions where he's at, and I don't even go around him because I'm just like, I can't.
He was at Collectors Paradise up at Winnetka for Ed. Up there, who runs Collectors, and I went up there and I was like, Ed, can you introduce me to Dave Lapham? And I went up there with my hand shaking.
Yeah.
Like, Ed, Dave, can you sign this for me? Because I needed a Dave Lapham autograph. He was one of the only creators I've asked for an autograph.
Yeah, I bought some pages from him, so I'm good. I don't. I feel like he's so influential to me, and he's so great that there's nothing that could be gained by me, looking like an idiot in front of him or trying,
Oh, I leave the house like that. So anything else, yeah. If you listen, here's my life hack: leave the house like an idiot. So anything embarrassing you do in public ain't no thing but a chicken wing.
Interesting. Well,
okay. or do it on a podcast. For 15, 16 years. Well, speaking of people I've gotten to autograph my comics, we got to talk Local Man, because
let's do it. Yeah,
it all makes sense now, knowing those influences, those writers' influences, that this book, Local Man, the heart that it has and the believability, it is a totally different book than Stray Dogs. And Geekscape, you're going to want to buy both. Local Man 1 is on stands now. You got to beg your comic book store to get it for you. I thought it was awesome and very similar to the Dave Lapham stuff, in that this character, you don't know much about him. He's sitting on a bus bench at the beginning of the book outside a small town, South Dakota much, and he's coming home, and he puts his thumb out for two people to come pick him up in a pickup truck, or they stop by and say, hey, the bus ain't coming. It hasn't come in a long time. And he asks for a ride. I won't go to the details of the Geekscape, but they basically find out who he is, and they're like, dude, you got to buzz off. When he comes into town, the first place he goes is home. His parents aren't happy to see him. And then when he goes to the local bar, They're not happy to see him, and you learn that he had a history as a 90s Image style superhero, and something went bad. You don't know it yet. Geekscape is not as of issue 1, but something's going down with the history that he had with this superhero book, and he is down and out back home as a loser has been, and you feel it's awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we so it's me and Tim Seeley. We write the book together and we draw the book together. I do the we call it the Farmington side because it takes place in this made up town called Farmington, Wisconsin. And Tim Seeley draws the superhero side. So every issue is like a flip book, like Image Comics used to be, or like Youngblood specifically was, and Brigade was, where there's a story on one side and then you flip it over and there's an upside down story on the back. And so what we wanted to do was tell a story about what happens to one of these characters after they're done being this guy, Tim and I are both such big fans of like the energy of those 90s Image comics. And he's about the same age as us too. And so we sort of came up in that time. And so it means something different to us than I think like new people who discover it. It means like it's different for them. And it definitely, the generation before us thought that it was just like pure nonsense. And so it's like a real specific era of creators who are sort of coming around now that like those books meant everything to us. And so it's just sort of like, well, what can we do that says something about those books without being like a just a pastiche or like
fan service,
a parody or that, yeah, or just trying to do like, there have been the like books or anthologies where it's just like people doing their version of like the energy that came from those. But we sort of thought, what if we took all the energy out?
Yeah.
What if instead of being extreme, it was just very serene and tranquil? But we sort of got into the heart of these characters and got down to sort of like what happens to somebody who had been at the top of the world and they had to sort of come crashing back down to the bottom.
I think it's awesome. The scene where he comes home and his parents have like eaten dinner without him and are like, yeah, we kind of like gave your room to, like this is your room. Like we're going to put you in the basement. The dog has taken his chair. Again, I see those influences on you, and not to say that you're not holding your own. I mean, you are doing a great job of putting these characters inhabiting them in a realistic way. Even if this person has superpowers, he has kind of like a bullseye type of ability to hit targets, I'm guessing, from the scene where he goes into the bar and he's playing darts. Nobody wants him to even be there. He's like, hey, can I play pool with y'all? They're like, get lost. He sees an X-Flame in there, Geekscape. I won't spoil it for you. I think that first issue of Local Man is one of my favorite things that I've been reading. I thought that thing was great. I can't wait for issue 2. But as Tony said, Tim Seeley, who I'm a fan of as well, is working on this book with him. If you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch, you're going to see some of the artwork I'm putting up from the book. This is art that Tony did, and it's the kind of like now storyline of this character post his superhero team, kind of down and out back home. It's very realistic. It reminds me of the Ed Brubaker stuff that he does with Phillips in books like Criminal and Fade Out, etc. It's really cool. It's realistic. It also reminds me of the stuff Kirkman was doing in that. Who is that? Paul? Who does Paul Azateca? I love Paul Azateca, and I think that book he did with Kirkman is awesome. And I think the stuff, I'll read anything that Paul draws because that stuff is so realistic and well blocked. Does that make sense?
Yeah, his
Outcast.
His staging is great. His layouts are great. Yeah, that art is colors by Brad Simpson too, who also colored Stray Dogs.
So here we have this amazing one side of the book, and then you flip it over. There's a smaller story that Tim Seeley is responsible for doing the artwork for, and it looks like an Image book. And how can you not be in love with this? It's nostalgia at its best.
If it was up to me, like I always say this, I would be happy if the whole thing was just looked like this. Like I feel like Tim could draw the down and out Midwest side too, and he could do this. Like like that's what comics look like to me when I close my eyes. They look like big steroid muscular guys, and like
Absolutely.
Scantily clad ladies and people with like laser hands, and they don't have pupils. Like that's what I want to see. But like when we first started talking about this, that was the sort of the real excitement was like, let's do flip books like Image used to, but have them be the current time and then the flashback, and have them sort of inform each other, and we'll sort of like set up mysteries in the ongoing part in the front, and then people can flip it over and they can find little tastes of like how we got there, or sort of like set up backstory and stuff. So that's basically what you're getting in this. Every issue has a major, like the main part of the book is written and drawn by me and Tim Seeley. It's written by me and Tim Seeley and drawn by me. And then the back part is drawn by Tim and written by the both of us. And I feel like it's like you agree, like it fits together nicely, like it works well.
And the art style in this like Liefeld, Wilts Portacio style, it places the book. You don't have to put mid-90s on anything. It doesn't even need that slug line telling you when this took place, because that artwork is so specific to that era of comics that this is mid-90s, and now you have somebody current. And
Tim jokes that it's the only time his art doesn't look dated.
I think it's awesome. How did you link up with Tim, and how did this book come together? Because we talked about how Stray Dogs came together. How did this book come together?
We had known each other through I think we met through Chris Moreno, and we had known each other for a few years, and we were at a convention together just when Stray Dogs was either about to come out, or I don't remember if Tim had read it at the time. He may have read it. But we were just sort of sitting next to each other, and Norm Ratman from Extreme Studios was next to us too. He's an inker at Extreme, and he brought a page in from Brigade #1, which Brigade was like the first Image comic that wasn't drawn by an Image founder. It was Marat Michaels. But he was super green at the time, and it was Marat Michaels' first comic, and it was Norm Ratman's first comic. And at the time, Rob Liefeld had gone in and redrawn all the faces. So if you look at Brigade #1, you see like very Rob Liefeld-y faces, and then everything else is just like something off a little bit.
And that was around the time that Rob was preparing with Jim to come back to Marvel for Heroes Reborn.
Oh no, this was like
after
early Image. This was right.
Way before. That's okay.
Year. Yeah.
Okay, because I remember Brigade still being on. I remember Brigade being on the charts for comic sales. I worked at a comic store in 96, 95, 96. I remember when that Heroes Reborn came out. Right before it, all those titles that were Heroes Reborn were in the dumpster, and then Heroes Reborn skyrocketed them to #1s. But books like Brigade were high on the charts.
Yeah.
Those were selling.
Brigade sold like crazy when it first came out. It was would have been the 7th Image comic, basically. Like,
wow. And Jim Paganelli says, "Look at those costumes in Tim Seeley's art of the '90s style." He goes, "They're so loud in '90s, they're giving me tinnitus." He loves that look. And then Nilu says, "Does that dude have 14-pack abs?" Yeah, well,
we're trying to squeeze every ab in there we could. We saw this original artwork. We saw this original artwork from Brigade, and it had these Rob Liefeld faces you could lift up and down, and just like we just sat there, me and Tim, looking at that and just marveling about like, God, imagine what it was like, those guys making comics back then, and like being these, like 22-year-old millionaires, and just sort of like, and we were so wrapped up in those comics and inspired by them. Just sort of like seeing that piece of original art really sparked like something creative in both of us. And we didn't start talking right then and there, but we did sort of say like, we got to work on something at some point. And then pretty soon after that, Tim emailed me and said, what if we did a thing that's like a 90s Image comic meets like a 90s Vertigo comic? And that was the sort of what we were talking about this as when we first started making it. And it eventually evolved into like a 90s Image comic meets like a crime comic, basically like an Ed Brubaker crime comic, or like a or like hopefully a David Lapham crime comic. But that's,
oh my god,
But it's those things that I love them both equally. Like I was buying Gen 13 and Stray Bullets on the same Wednesday, and to me they went together. Like they're two sides of the same thing. So it was just about figuring out a way to tell a story where we could put those two things together.
I think it's awesome. In Geekscape, it's like, I had to get Tony on the show because Stray Dogs, you've heard it. I'm a fan. But when I left that signing where I came to be like, hey, I'd love to have you on the podcast. It was one of the big downpour days here in Los Angeles. And I didn't care. I was going to go through the rain and I was going to ask Tony to be on the podcast because I was a big Stray Dogs fan. I came home over the course of that weekend. I read this Local Man, and I immediately started telling my friends about it and saying, hey guys, this is a book that you might overlook because it's not Marvel, it's not DC, and sometimes the indies are hit or miss. This one's a hit. And what I like is that there's more time spent with the characters, building them as people, and the plot is, I'm gonna say, my favorite filmmaker Linklater. Like it's plot proof in the fact that just hanging out with this character in the situation is interesting enough, and then the mystery is slowly unwinding. And I love that you flip the book over and you see his relationship with his 90s image style team, and you start to say, okay, so that's the character that was referenced in the other side of the book. This is where they were. Okay, let's see what happened to this team. What happened to this character? And I like the slow burn where these two stories are going to meet in the middle. And hopefully you get a big revelation. And if not, Geekscapists, if you're not out with this book when it's all collected, I don't know what to tell you, because the ride was pretty damn good to begin with. Big fan of Tony Fleecs starting with that issue, man. Stray Dogs was cool. Glad I read it. Tone's a friend. For sure was going to buy every issue. This is the book that made me a Tony Fleecs fan. No awesome. Offense. Like, no craziness.
What if we didn't have it lead to anything? It's not too late. Like, we could just abandon our plans to have the plot resolve and just have them sort of hang out. I would fucking love to do that. Just vibing, just ex-superheroes sitting around.
I'm down with that. I think our good friend Ralph Oppel and Taylor Morden hit me up, and they're doing this new, I can talk about it because it just got announced, this documentary on Lost. Taylor did Last Blockbuster and a couple other documentaries that are fantastic. Mm-hmm. And they just got announced in Variety on Wednesday, this new Lost documentary about the Lost thing. And Ralph had hit me up a couple months ago saying, hey, Jonathan, we're working on this Lost documentary. I'm trying to find people to interview. And we're doing, and I'm going to be, Taylor's going to be in LA during this window. And speaking of Lost, I think Lost is one of those shows that if people are upset with the ending, I know I was like, oh, it didn't end. You got to respect the fact that that show was really damn good. And it had some phenomenal episodes, some of the best of TV ever. And if you didn't like the ending, who cares? Because the damn ride was pretty good. So you're going to read this Local Man because I told you to read this Local Man. And if it all comes and done and you don't like the bow that's tied on at the end of it, who cares? Because you just got some great books. I don't know what to tell you. Too bad. Go write your own damn comic. That's what Tony did.
I think we got a pretty okay ending. We're working towards it.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, I would be just as happy to just have 5, 6, 7, 8 issues of just superheroes kicking it, being mean to each other and stuff like that. The trick I think is in something like this is this guy's downtrodden and how to make it just not a bummer. Like you want to sort of identify with this guy, but also not have it just be like endlessly bleak. And I think like something we're sort of working our best to figure out. That's what the trick of this thing has been. It's just like we want this guy to be constantly shit upon, but also just not, he's sort of like Charlie Brown. Like you just want him to be somebody that everybody fucks with all the time, but also he sort of has this something inside of him that makes him, for whatever reason, want to keep going.
Well, Geekscape is in the first issue, one of the final panels of that, the modern current day storyline in his hometown involves his team. And I'm not going to tell you, but there's a look back in that sequence. And it could have just easily been the scene, but there's one panel that is a look back from one of his former team members, and they connect, and it's a glimmer of hope. And I think as long as those things are populated in there, we're going to keep turning the pages and keep going on this book. I don't think you're in any worry of it being too much. It's too much fun to read to worry about it being too down and out. Jim Pugnarelli says, Jonathan, the way you're talking about Local Man's story structure and chronology reminds me of the 2 TV shows I have a great love for. Lost, that we spoke about, and then Yellow Jackets, which also has a modern day flashback storyline, and that's fantastic. That's about to get the season 2 starting up there. You convinced me. I need to be reading it. Well, with that, Geekscape, I think my job here is done.
Hang it up.
Convinced Jim Pugnarelli to buy another comic book.
Thanks, Jim.
Jim's fantastic. I've been friends with Jim for over 2 decades at this point. He was the first person to greet me when I went up to Columbia University to look at where I was going to grad school. I was like, hey, I'm going to school here. Is there anything I need to know? He's like, have you talked to the housing office yet? I was like, no. He's like, it's too late for you to get housing. You got to get over there right now. And so I race across campus to the housing office, and I finally got housing. But Jim's the one who lit that fire under my pants, and he's been a dear friend ever since he saved me from being homeless in New York during my grad school years.
You'd have been
Tony, anything else we got to plug here? Because those 2 books are awesome, Stray Dogs and Local Man.
No, I mean, I think probably FOC is over right now, but if you work at a comic store and you're listening to this or watching it live, you can order the second printing up until the end of today. Local Man issue 1. We sold through the first printing, and we're doing a second printing at FOC's today. Second issue comes out at the end of the month, so in a couple weeks here, and then we're just wrapping up issue 3 and working on 4 and 5. So just check out Local Man. If you didn't read Stray Dogs is available at all your finest comic book stores. You can go to cheapgraphicnovels.com or even Amazon if you must. Please check out my books. I would appreciate that. And I appreciate you having me on here to talk about them.
Dude, of course, I love it. And we have enough mutual friends that the stalker nature of my approach to have you on the show, I hope, has receded to just creepy.
Just a guy in the neighborhood, you know Ed, Tom, Chris Moreno.
I'm just a local man at this point. Just another local has-been. If we want to follow you online and have you onto our podcasts, where should people follow you?
You can harass me to come on your podcasts at Tony Fleecs on Twitter is the easiest. Instagram. I'm on Facebook, but that's a lot of just me and my aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff. You can go to tonyfleecs.com or straydogscomic.com, and there's a mailing list on both of those you can sign up for. So if you're just like, I don't want to hear what this guy has to say every day, but if there's something major happening, I'd like to know about it. That's the best place to stay up to date on that type of stuff. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find.
Amazing. Geekscape, you know where to find us. Just search for Geekscape. You can find us on any podcatcher, and you're probably going to find a couple podcasts from the Geekscape network, because in that little what's this show about, it probably says member of the Geekscape network. We have upwards of 30 shows at this point, covering everything from pro wrestling to music to I don't know what else we got. We got filmmaking up in here, and this flagship show, which started it all, which is no longer the most popular show on the network by far. I'm very proud of our shows, and I love seeing them like climb in numbers and seeing all the success. This show will be back next week for a brand new episode. There's other stuff. So just keep watching this space, sharing Geekscape with your friends, and leave us those 5-star reviews and tell us that you enjoyed Tony. Go reach out to him on social media and let him know, I loved you on Geekscape. That was great. Looking forward to Local Man issues 1 and 2. I can't wait till the end of the month to read that issue 2. It's awesome. Until next time, Geekscape. Love you so much. Don't hate, create, everybody, and see you next time. Peace.